Hey dreamers, if you've had a paranormal encounter that you'd like to share with the show, you can write in or record a message using your phone and send it to somedreamland@gmail.com. Or you can follow the link in the show notes to use our voice message system. If you're enjoying the show, please don't forget to follow, subscribe, rate, and leave a review with your favorite podcatcher. Also, find and follow us on Facebook and Twitter using @somedreamland. And while you're at it, please let your friends and family know about the show, as this will only help to grow our audience and enable us to bring you more quality content in the future. As always, thank you for listening. It is much appreciated.
You're about to enter a podcast filled with high strangeness, conspiracies, the paranormal, and legends from around the world, with your host, Ken Mark, and brought to you by WNIP Productions. This is Somewhere in Dreamland.
Welcome back, dreamers. Tonight, my guest is Lyle Blackburn. Lyle has had a lifelong fascination with legendary creatures, and you've probably seen or heard him on both television or film, such as Monsters and Mysteries in America, Finding Bigfoot, The Mothman of Point Pleasant, or The Boggy Creek Monster. Along with being the founder of the rock band Ghoultown, Lyle is also the author of several acclaimed books, including The Beast of Boggy Creek and Sinister Swamps. So, without further ado, grab your blanket, turn down the lights, get comfy, and let's fade away into
Dreamland.
How you doing tonight, man?
Good.
I guess I'm ready to start, man, if you're ready.
Yeah, I'm ready.
How did you get your start in all of this, Lyle, man? How did you get started in all this? Was it an experience? Was it just a pure interest from you when you were a child, or what?
Yeah, I mean, it was something that I just loved as a kid, and as far back as I can remember, I loved horror movies, monster movies, and things like that. And then somewhere in elementary school, I got a book called Strange But True, and it had stories of Bigfoot, Yeti, Loch Ness Monster, and stuff like that. So when I read that, I was like, oh, this is really cool, because this sounds like these actually could exist. And just kind of progressed from there, watching television shows, documentaries, and then I saw the movie The Legend of Boggy Creek in a drive-in theater when I was really young. And since that dramatized sightings of a Sasquatch-like creature in southern Arkansas, about 3 hours from where I lived in Texas, that was even crazier, because prior to that, something like Loch Ness Monster, way over in Scotland, and even Bigfoot in the Pacific Northwest, which was kind of the thinking at the time, that really kind of brought it home. So it's just something that I've just loved ever since. And I, would read books or study or follow and that sort of stuff until later that I kind of became more serious about the research.
Okay. Yeah, well, my experience, man, what got me started is kind of similar. I was into horror movies. I've been into horror movies and reading horror stuff. And I got it was a Ripley's Believe It or Not book that had all kinds of legends about like the Banshee and all kinds of different things like that in it. And that, man, that was so cool. Plus, I grew up in Ohio, which is a weird place. A lot of strange things go on there. And, kind of got my juices flowing on everything. I like the whole broad spectrum of the paranormal, but cryptozoology is really where my heart is. I really, because it's fascinating, because it could, like you said, it could be real, you know? I mean, it could be right then and there, and you could get actual proof. It isn't like a ghost where you're getting proof and maybe it's real proof and maybe it's not real proof. You don't know. But if you get a footprint or you get a piece of hair, I mean, that's real proof, you know?
Right. There's more potential physical evidence. You know, there's obviously more ghost pictures, more this or that, whereas there's less cryptid specimens. But if you did get a specimen, yeah, surely it's more, more of a possibility it could prove something.
Right. So what is your favorite, like, cryptozoology creature? What is your favorite? Where's your heart at?
Well, it would be the Boggy Creek Monster, or as they call it, the Falk Monster, which is what I'm kind of known for. My first book was The Beast of Boggy Creek, which documented, told the history about sightings of this creature and the making of the Legend of Boggy Creek movie. And, there had been a long history of sightings associated with that creature before the movie was made in 1971 and was released thereafter. And ever since, there's been sightings. So that's really where, I got my start in this, what I first investigated. And I, since written two books on the specific subject and 3 sort of on a broader range. So I always kind of come back to that subject. And that's mostly when I get questions, I'm always talking about the Boggy Creek Monster. So that'll always be my favorite and my sort of go-to thing, even though I've investigated many, many others, and I'm certainly fascinated with all of it.
Right. So let's talk about all the things you've investigated. I know you got Momo on your list. You have lots to do with swamps, actually. Something where I'm from, you got the Lizardman, which I want to talk to you a little bit about later. So what all else have you researched?
Certainly a wide range of Bigfoot legends and regional Bigfoot stories, such as Momo, which is the Missouri monster. And there's plenty of those, in Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Mississippi. I've been out to Florida to, look into skunk ape activity. So certainly a wide range of the Bigfoot stuff, and a lot of it in the South. I always saw that as my sort of zone, since it was in my proximity to go to. Swamps, I've always been fascinated. And my book, Sinister Swamps, covers a wide range of swamps where strange activity has been known to be reported. And in that case, I just wrote about whatever was reported in the swamp in terms of weirdness and paranormal stuff and missing people, and, whether people saw a Bigfoot or a ghost or spook lights, whatever. It all just seemed to be something that swamps tended to produce, and so terrain-wise, that's brought me in contact with a lot of different strange stories. I've been up to Point Pleasant a few times and am familiar with the Mothman stories and legends and sighting reports, and have worked on films about the Mothman. I wrote a book called Lizardman, which profiles a case from South Carolina back in the late 80s, in which people in the small town of Bishopville reported seeing this upright, scaly humanoid type thing in Skateboard Swamp. And so that Lizardman obviously is a category of cryptids that, is kind of a spooky, almost like, I always thought it was like creature from the Black Lagoon come to life. So, I thought those were cool. I live in Texas, so the Chupacabra has come up from time to time, and, there's different versions of what the Chupacabra may or may not be, but people always ask me about that. And then I've gotten a host of other reports of bizarre things, from pterosaur sightings, giant birds, to small 2-foot tall gnome-looking creatures. You get those sort of smattering of weirdness. So there's all that sort of fills in the gaps as well.
You got me there, man. I just talked to Chad Lewis last week, and I was telling him about my experiences with gnomes, the garden gnomes. Man, they're scary. They're creepy. They don't even have to be real gnomes. The garden gnomes scare me. I don't like them at all, man. I don't know what it is. It's like they're just leave me alone with them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's some creepy stuff. I mean, in my Sinister Swamps book, I cover legends and actual modern sighting reports of a creature known as the Puck Wedgie, which is essentially it's a 3 or 4 foot tall sort of, not like a gnome, but similar, I guess, in terms of the way it's been described, and just a real creepy kind of thing, because I think we can sort of think of Bigfoot and say, okay, well, it's this giant species of ape or something that can walk upright, but when you're talking about Puck Wedgie or some thing like that, you're not quite sure what it is. Is it a cryptid, an extraterrestrial, a spiritual being?
I think a lot of those creatures are like wood folk or fairies or gnomes. I think that there's more sightings of them across the world than just about anything. No, wouldn't you agree with that?
I mean, there's certainly a lot. I mean, I wouldn't say nothing can outnumber Bigfoot report.
That's true.
And of course, Bigfoot has got a lot of popularity and notoriety, and of course, a lot more people come forward. Oh man, I saw Bigfoot, but not many people are going to go, I saw this like 3 foot tall thing on 2 legs that looked like a cross between a goblin and a gnome. Most people probably aren't going to even say if they saw that, because people think you're crazy.
Right. Well, hey, let's so I should probably explain. I said that I grew up in Ohio. I live in South Carolina now, and you were probably like, what the heck's he talking about? Lizardman. He said he lived in Ohio, but we moved here about 1.5 years ago, and the first thing I did was go up to Bishopville and check out the whole Lizardman scene. I had to see what was going on with that. So can you tell me a little bit more about that?
So the Lizardman story essentially starts in the summer of 1988, and the sheriff's office there in Lee County got a call from some people who live on the outskirts of that little town of Bishopville near Sinister Swamp, and they said their car looked like it had been mauled by an animal, torn up. And the police deputies went out there and looking at it like, what, and it did look very strange, and it looked like an animal or something had been fighting on this car, and there was marks and footprints and all this sort of stuff. And the sheriff at the time, Liston Truesdale, went down there and looked into this, and as he was, some people said, well, maybe it was the Lizardman. And Sheriff Truesdale said, what do you mean the Lizardman? And people said, well, people have been seeing this sort of reptilian thing out in the swamp. We call it the Lizardman. So that sort of set off this wave, which resulted in a young man named Christopher Davis coming into the sheriff's office about 2 weeks later saying, well, something happened to me and it might have to do with this Lizardman. And he said he had gotten a flat tire one night coming home from work in Bishopville going through Sinister Swamp. He had a flat, and as he was changing it and just finishing that up, he said this thing on 2 legs was coming at him through the fennel grass, and he could see it in the moonlight. And at first he thought, well, maybe it's a person, which is scary enough in itself, because he's out there in the middle of nowhere at 2 a.m. at night. And then he said he realized it was some kind of thing. It was a creature. It looked scaly. It had long arms and had 3 fingers with long claws. And he jumped in his little Honda Celica and took off, and this thing tried to jump in there and pull him out of the car. He got away and got home. And so he tells this story to the sheriff, and the sheriff, was dubious as to what this thing was, but he knew that the kid was telling the truth. Something happened to the kid. And then got a lot of newspaper coverage, and then other people came forward saying, yeah, we saw something like this either, beforehand, going back a couple of years, or thereafter, after Christopher Davis had his incident. And that just became this big thing for Bishopville, and a lot of news coverage. There was the Today Show and all these big news features on television were coming down there broadcasting, and there was a lot of newspaper stuff. And so, that just became associated with the town. And my involvement in that is, after I wrote Beast of Boggy Creek, I was doing what I call the swamp tour, and I was out there in Bishopville. I met with Sheriff Truesdale, who was retired by then, looked at all the police files, looked at all the reports, and ended up writing a book on that Lizardman incident. And just a fascinating thing. And for me, again, it was sort of like people in modern times seeing a creature from the Black Lagoon. And in recent times, they've had Lizardman festivals and cryptozoology related events, and I've done tours down there. And but it's just a strange story, and there's no one explanation, or never was solved. But certainly, people were seeing something that was unexplainable,
right,
back then.
So I had a theory for a long time on the Lizardman myself, because it fascinated me even before I moved down here. But it's pretty true that in Bigfoot, in the case of Bigfoot, that regionally they're a little bit different from each other, but kind of the same, right?
True, yeah. They do have some characteristics that can be different based on where they are.
So I was thinking at one point, I'm like, I think the Lizardman was just a misidentified Bigfoot. But then once I started digging into it a little bit more, I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's definitely one of the theories, and one that I, discuss in the book, that, it could be simply a misidentification. Which is a weird one, because you're misidentifying something that is already questionable to exist.
True.
Bigfoot. But again, we go back to where there's a lot of Bigfoot sightings, and Bigfoot seems more plausible than some sort of a hybrid, reptilian humanoid thing. And, this is a swampy area. It was at night on most of these encounters. Certainly it could have been wet. It could have had a skin condition in which the hair, like mange or something, where the hair was falling off. It could have been covered with algae and appeared greenish or scaly. So, that's certainly one explanation, is that they were actually seeing a Bigfoot. And in fact, some of the witnesses said they thought it looked like it had hair. They said it looked brownish. And in one, there was a family of 4 people that saw it in 1990. I think it was 1990. That had a sighting in Skateboard Swamp, and this thing jumped at their car, and they clearly saw it. And Sheriff Truesdale had them write down what they had seen. He separated them all, brought them in, and said, "You write down what you saw." When you read those statements from those witnesses, one of them says, "I think it was a Sasquatch," right there.
Wow. I'm going to have to pick your book up, man. I apologize. I didn't get to read that one. Listen, I'm reading 3 at a time right now, flipping back and forth. So I'm going to get caught up on everybody's books here sooner or later. But so it seems to me like there are tons of weird things that happen near swamps. Why do you think that is?
Well, swamps themselves are typically in the least developed areas. I mean, we've encroached on a lot of those swamp areas, but ultimately they're bottomlands. They're murky, filled with water. And that's not, not as many people go in there, or you have to go in by boat, or, a lot of people are just spooked out by that. So you're not going to have the human traffic that you would in other areas. And therefore, if some creature wanted to, stay remote, stay hidden, that's the kind of places that they could go, along with, say mountains and other things like that. But swamps provide all the sustenance they would need. There's plenty of food sources, there's water, that sort of thing. And as well, swamps kind of they're primordial. It's like we kind of have this preconceived thing that was the birth of life. I mean, when you're in a swamp, you look up and you think, well, any minute now I'm going to see a dinosaur. It just carries that old primordial feel that anything could be possible. And certainly, swamps, they're dangerous places. Many people have died, gone missing, that sort of thing. So naturally, they're going to be associated with ghostly sightings. A lot of Native American tribes lived in these swamps, and there's legends of people seeing Native American looking apparitions. There's swamp gas and strange lights and any number of things. So it's sort of just definitely a focal point of paranormal activity.
Yeah, makes sense. It all makes sense to me. Well, I want to move on up to West Virginia with you and talk to you a little bit about the Mothman, because the Mothman is near and dear to my heart, man. I got to go to Point Pleasant a few times. I lived about an hour and a half from it for most of my life, and it's just a cool place. I mean, it's just a really cool place. And that story, I feel like it is one of the most bizarre encounters altogether, because it goes so deep. It's such a deep story. There's so many facets to it that it's just mind blowing. I just want to kind of get your idea and feel on the Mothman and all of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of the most fascinating cases of people seeing something that can't be explained. And the Mothman case really has it all. I think this is one reason it's popular, because it's not only just people saw a possible creature, but at the same time, there were sightings of strange airborne craft, UFOs. Allegedly, men in black came to Point Pleasant and were lurking around there in the small town. So you bring in this sort of element of government espionage. And then there was the tragic collapse of the Silver Bridge that sort of was the climax of the Mothman, 13 months of the Mothman sightings from 66 to 67. And, therein now you have this big major tragedy, and the Mothman, people say, well, perhaps, the Mothman was this harbinger of doom. It was an omen, an ill omen. So you've got every facet to sort of study and research and to bring something of interest to everyone. Me personally, it's one that you can't really solve, because there's so many angles to it. As far as looking into it as a cryptid case, I certainly think that the witnesses, especially the first several that reported it in 1966, definitely saw something. It saw something that was unusual. I mean, if it was something like a giant bird, then it was one that was not native to the area. It was one that was huge. And if not that, then we're talking about some unknown species of bird, or, there's all those other theories that it was government paratroopers and all this, you just go all different directions to try to explain what those people saw. But ultimately, I believe they saw something. And, if you've been in the TNT area up there, it just carries this really weird, strange vibe to it. And again, sort of seems like one of those focal points where strangeness is just going to happen. So, yeah, I love that case. And I was a part of 2 documentaries from Small Town Monsters, in which we covered the 13 months leading up to the collapse of the bridge, and then later sightings that have happened ever since. And it's just a captivating case.
Yeah, it's a really cool case. I mean, it goes all the way back to, like, some people think that Chief Cornstalk is involved in that the curse there that goes all the way up. They think that has something to do with it too. I mean, it's just a strange case. Like you said, I don't think it'll ever get old. It's just, there's too much to it.
Right. Yeah. And I didn't mention that you've got this Native American connection where in a lot of cryptid cases, you'll have that Native American legends and lore that kind of either support or possibly play into it. And, people have proposed that there's curses, and that kind of plays into that harbinger of doom kind of vibe for the Mothman.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So when was the last time that you've heard about a Mothman encounter in that area?
I can't think offhand what the date would have been, but it seems like within the last 2 or 3 years, I saw a report that I thought was fairly credible. There's been a wave of Mothman sightings around Chicago, ironically enough. So you get that sort of same Mothman thing. But as far as right there in Point Pleasant, and especially if you're talking about the traditional TNT area where it was seen at first, you don't have you just don't get a lot of reports. That they're usually somewhere else, but people describe seeing something that they'll say is almost very much like the Mothman. And over the years, even me personally, I've gotten random reports of those sort of things. And then, of course, my colleagues also would feel these kind of things. So there's always seems like perpetually somebody's reporting a potential sighting of a Mothman-like entity, at least in that general vicinity.
Right on. The Beast of Bray Road. That's a cool story too, man. I am fascinated by the growing up in Ohio again, there's plenty of sightings of dog men and things like that. So the Beast of Bray Road is a cool story too. And you covered that. You wrote a book on that, didn't you?
No, I haven't written a book. I was involved in the Small Town Monsters Bray Road Beast film.
Oh, that's what I was thinking.
That narrated on that one. But it's one I'm familiar with, and Linda Godfrey's classic Beast of Bray Road book, and Linda Godfrey being the preeminent researcher. It's sort of like her Boggy Creek, whereas I'm here and she was there at the right time. So it's like that Bray Road case sort of is the quintessential launching point for Dogman and quote unquote Wolfman or werewolves, and it's one that everybody thinks of when they think of Dogman, even though there's sightings obviously elsewhere. But that's that Dogman as a category of cryptids is a spooky one, because there's a little less, there's less sightings than Bigfoot. They're a little more ominous, creepy, scary. And the question is what is this thing? Biologically, why would a canid stand up on 2 legs? And if it does, why is it's so big? And is there any supernatural quality to these beings if they do exist?
Yeah, man, I'll tell you, it's really Dogman is really one of the coolest things ever for me. I don't know why. I don't ever want to mess with one or see one, but you know what I mean? It's just cool. It's fascinating. But I do want to talk with you about Boggy Creek, man, because I know that's where your heart is. Has there been any recent sightings in that area?
Yeah. There's been some recent ones. Let's see what year in 2020. In 2019, there were several. Some local women saw a upright creature run across the road at dusk, right in front of their car, and watched it run down a side road. And this is in a place where there's been several sightings in the last probably 4 to 5 years. A young girl reported to her father that she saw a monkey thing in the woods. It's a kid, so I don't know how credible that is, but and then there's been several truck drivers. There was a hunter in late 2019 that was hunting out there and saw one when he was sitting in the tree stand and he was using binoculars. You could see it. And then I've investigated numerous encounters that have happened, anywhere from, the last few years all the way back to, the 80s and 70s and into the era when the Legend of Boggy Creek was made. So yeah, it's a place where there's always sightings. And the good thing about those is typically I can go up there, interview the witness. I can go to the site where it happened. I'm very, very familiar with that whole area now. And I can kind of correlate, people who don't even know each other said, oh, I saw one over here, I saw this. And then, somebody coincidentally will see one in the same area. So I can kind of put the data together to get a picture of, what tends to go on all the time over there.
Now, what is the best piece of evidence that you've seen or that maybe you've collected yourself from that area?
Over the years, I've seen a couple of alleged photographs that I was not convinced of. The best I've seen is footprints, and not only just the footprint itself, but the story behind where it was found and the person that found it. Just briefly, if anybody knows anything about the Fouke Monster Boggy Creek case, it's said to have 3 toes, and that kind of comes from the movie, and it comes from a incident in June of 1971 in which they found a long line of tracks going through a freshly plowed soybean field, and these are long, like 14-inch tracks that look like Bigfoot tracks, except they have 3 toes. And obviously that kind of had a monstrous quality. But over the years, there's been tracks found that do have what looks like 3 toes, but there's also what we would consider more traditional Bigfoot looking tracks with something with 5 toes. And there was a track found there in 2004 by a guy I've gotten to know quite well since then. And it's a pretty darn good track. It looks, it's a track of something. And it could be one of these creatures. I've seen a couple of tracks myself in recent years. One of those recently, in which I got a call. They found tracks coming out of the woods, sort of down a slope, and ended in the Sulphur River, which is a river that kind of snakes in and around Fouke. And it looked like something ran down and stopped or jumped in the water, and I found deer tracks, and it appeared to have been chasing a deer. It had rained between the time the tracks were found and the time I got there, but they looked like legit tracks, and by the placement and movement and sliding, I could tell it wasn't just somebody stamping tracks or making a hoax. This was real stuff. That was fairly convincing, especially because I saw it myself. And then several years ago, myself and one of my research buddies were out walking through the woods late at night and came across what looked like a fresh track in a puddle across this little trail, and it looked like it had 3 toes. And that was the only time I've been kind of spooked, really, because it looked like something had walked by there just, within 30 minutes of us coming through there. And it's in the middle, we're in the middle of scary woods, moon. We weren't really carrying any lights. And, but, again, I didn't see the creature make the track. So all I can do is say, well, perhaps this is the track of the creature. So that's the best you got as far as solid evidence.
Right. Now, have you ever seen one yourself, or what you thought was one yourself, ever?
I haven't. And there's been twice where I think, or it was possible that I was close. One of those was in Boggy Creek, where something that was howling followed us down the bayou while we were in a canoe. And when we got out, went up the hill, this thing started howling right across the water. And I grabbed a light and ran down the hill and tried to look at it, but it ran off in the woods. A very similar incident in the Ocala National Forest, in which there's a lot of stories of skunk apes there. This is in Florida. And something was hitting on a can in the woods, and I heard it and went into the canopy to take a look, and whatever it was took off running. And again, I just ran through the woods trying to see it with a flashlight, but every time I would move, it ran, and it was just one step ahead. But whatever it was, big. It wasn't a deer, and I don't think it was a bear. There are bear there, but if you pair that up with whatever I found, the can, something was kind of hitting on it. I suppose a bear could click its claw on it or whatever, but needless to say, anyway, I didn't see whatever it was, and eventually just kept running and running ahead. And, I didn't want to I would have been lost out there, kept going.
Is there any Native American stories around that area, the Boggy Creek area, that correlate with the beast?
In general, yes. That area in southern Arkansas is basically connected to northern Louisiana and East Texas. And the forestry there is pretty much contiguous all across there. And it's very heavily forested. It's very swampy with a lot of bottoms. Just think about Louisiana, where all that drainage is going. And in East Texas, most people don't associate Texas with having swamps or heavy woods, but East Texas is really wooded. And that area was originally settled by the Caddo Indians. And the Caddo Indians had stories of some sort of a being they called lost giants, which existed in the woods, and they were a tribe of people who they interacted with, but they were very much standoff. They weren't, they respected them, but they didn't, I guess, get in their business. And so, the best we can conjecture is that perhaps that they're talking about the very same creature we would call Bigfoot. And that whole area there, which I call the Caddo Triangle, which includes Boggy Creek as the top point of that triangle, is just full of Bigfoot sightings dating back many, many, many years. So that sort of all adds up that creatures moving in and out of that area would certainly have interacted with Native Americans, if they exist.
All right, let me ask you, what do you think these creatures are? Because there's so many theories behind, the Bigfoot creature. Everything from being lost by time, the missing link, interdimensional. People even claim to see these things with like accompanied with UFOs and things like that. What do you think they are?
Me personally, I mean, I just kind of always operated with the traditional theory that they were some sort of a species of ape that had miraculously gone undiscovered thus far. One theory is that these are Gigantopithecus or descendants thereof, that a large ape-like creature that lived in China who could have migrated across the Bering Strait, thousands of years ago, and then distributed its way through North America. Theories like that are ever evolving, because at first they say Gigantopithecus walked upright, and then, well, maybe it didn't. But nonetheless, the descriptions I get from the majority of people describe what appears to be a human-like, but more humanoid, ape-like animal of some sort. And so I just continue to look for what I believe is a bipedal ape. However, you've got to try to explain why we have reports, but we're not able to prove them. I mean, it's not to say that just because we don't have bones doesn't disprove it. I mean, that the populations of these things would be conceivably very small, and it would be very hard to find bones. There's bears in East Texas, but I've never walked across a bear carcass or even bones. This whole thing about interdimensional, or they come from UFOs, first question I always get is, what do you think about Bigfoot's coming from UFOs? Well, I've interviewed hundreds and hundreds of people, and no one has ever told me they saw a UFO or a Bigfoot together. Even though there are some cases, yes, where people have seen things in the sky and then there's an ape-like creature seen, but very few, one maybe, of people saying they saw a creature actually get off a craft. So I just dismiss that. The whole thing about portals and stuff is, okay, it's a good theory. Let's think about it. But why are Bigfoot creatures coincidentally always seen where large animals would exist, like mountains, swamps, heavy woods? They're not seen in the middle of the Walmart parking lot. I mean, right. maybe they are, but
every once in a while, maybe. But yeah, who knows? I've seen a couple guys that look like Bigfoot at Walmart. So,
but I guess I don't sit in my front yard to do Bigfoot research, waiting for one to pop out of a portal on my street. You would think if they're moving through dimensions, then perhaps they would just come out wherever. So that's kind of where I go with that. They could be Neanderthals that have miraculously survived extinction. All these other theories, and I don't claim to know the answer, and I don't claim that the way I think is the way to think. Anybody can have any theory they want, and certainly until it's proven, all theories are good on the table. But the thing I have a problem is when somebody says they know for certain, because thus far we cannot scientifically prove any of the theories, so no one knows for certain, with the exception of perhaps a few individuals who have some miraculous abilities. I don't know, but for the most part, at this point, we're still trying to solve the mystery, and there really is no one answer.
I agree with that, man. You people that say that they absolutely know, man, to me, they're just as bad as a hardcore skeptic. You know what I mean? Because you don't know, like you said, we aren't going to know until we have one right in front of us and we can actually, figure it out. So
Right. And the thing is like people, I know there's what's called believers or knowers. And that could be true that somebody has seen one. And if you have seen one, you do know they exist. But that doesn't answer what they are and where they came from, because we can't examine that. That's we really don't dispute that people have seen them. But the question is, what exactly are they? How intelligent? What, are they more ape-like? Are they a branch off of the, hominid tree? Or just where do they fit into nature? So those questions are what no one can know right now until we, one way or another, have one to examine.
Right. Well, I know I talked with a Bigfoot researcher out of Michigan not too long ago, and it was pretty interesting. He thinks these things study us while we're in the woods just as much as we study them or try to figure them out. And he said even to the fact that he was in the woods one day and he heard this thing say hello to him, not once but twice, like in a real crazy rash voice. This thing said hello to him. And he said it scared the heck out of him, but I mean, like you said, we don't know how intelligent these things are, and I would have to agree with him that if we're out there in the woods, they're probably just as interested in us as we are of them, and they're trying to figure out what the heck we are and why we're in their spot,
Oh, I agree. Yeah, because for them to remain elusive, they've got to have some manner of intelligence above other animals. And if they do, they probably are observing us, taking notes, and like with this guy, kind of messing with him almost, which is, they throw rocks and other things. So yeah, I mean, they got to be watching us. They're not. These aren't armadillos that are just da 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 da,
right,
cruising around and just whoops, I got in the road. They've got to be more consciously aware of what's going on.
Have you ever got any or heard of any cases or had any reported to you that were just crazy scary, like that absolutely terrified someone? Yeah. There's been a number of those where the witness either felt vulnerable or the creature displayed some aggression. There's a number of those in the Boggy Creek area. A couple of hunters that said this thing was thrashing about and howling and sort of displaying like, get out of my territory. There was a coon hunter down there that came across one of these in one of the bayous, and this thing reached down and splashed water at him. He just took off running. There was a witness, Mike Woolley, that I became friends with back in the 80s in Louisiana. He was in a tree stand deer hunting, and one of these creatures came out and looked at him, and eventually he got out of the stand and just started running, and these creatures were sort of stalking him, flanking him, two of them on either side, running him out of the woods. They never got him, or they could have, obviously, I would say, but ran him out of the woods. There was a woman, Crook Lake in North Texas, that said she was out there in a truck that had a flat tire, and her husband had to walk back to town, and 3 of these creatures came up to the window. One of them was reaching its arm in there trying to pull her out. Just on and on. That's pretty terrifying, man.
Stuff like that, and obviously, Bigfoot, they're animals. They could be territorial. They could be, or even if they're not animal, whatever they are, they could be territorial, protective. Some individuals may be more aggressive than others, just like humans. We got laid back people, and we got people who are easily agitated. Could be the same thing here. So, a lot of frightening encounters. I once did a presentation on Sasquatch attacks, and I had an hour-long presentation of just crazy, scary cases of people saying they had been, attacked by these creatures.
You ever heard of anybody getting taken by these creatures?
Yeah, I mean, there's the old Albert Ostman story from the Pacific Northwest, one of the sort of Bigfoot 101 cases in which he was camping and he was in a sleeping bag, and Bigfoot's literally picked him up and took him for miles and held him captive in their little forest home area until he was able to give them some snuff and kind of get him woozy, and he escaped. Let's see, kidnappings. There's a lot of stories that missing children have been kidnapped by Bigfoots because they will later be found and say, "Oh, I was saved by the nice bear." Bears don't pick up human children. I was picked up by this bear, and these children had no scratches upon them, and they would be found in deep in these woodland areas with briars and undergrowth that would have scratched them all out, but somehow they're not scratched. But of course, the kids were usually too young to differentiate as to exactly what animal it was that saved them. And then, you've got other stories of people being taken, but there's no one, the people are never seen again. So there's really no way to say that they were or they were not taken by Bigfoot. It's just that whomever investigated it suggested that perhaps this, a Bigfoot had taken them. So, but there was a lot of stories early on in the Pacific Northwest, especially with the Native American tribes. Back then, a lot of the stories talked about these hairy forest creatures, hairy giants, as kidnapping women and children and being very ominous. So some of the early stories were all about that whole thing.
Yeah, it's really a fascinating topic. When you go out and you interview people that have had stories, do you go out with a skeptical mind at first, or are you like middle of the road?
Well, I would say middle of the road. I mean, I want to be balanced, and I'm certainly skeptical. I don't want to. I've got plenty of reports. There's no need to include one that I don't think is credible. And when I interview somebody, I mean, I want to say, yes, it's okay to tell me what you saw because other people have seen this. I've heard these stories. This isn't. I don't think you're crazy. I just want to listen to what you got and let's talk about it. So in that respect, I'm not just going in totally skeptical, but I'm not just taking every story at, its value, no matter how crazy. There's been quite a few that I just, first off, the story may be, a stretch. And then if I talk to the witness for a period of time and determine that this person just seems desperate to tell a story, or they seem just off or whatever, then I'll just discount it, because that's not helping anything. If the person saw, 18 families of Bigfoot everywhere they move, Bigfoot's come to their house. Oh, wait, they saw several UFOs, and then just one thing after another, it starts to get, okay, this, I'm not saying you didn't see all this stuff. I'm just saying this is starting to sound impossible.
Yeah, right. I'm sure you get quite a few of those as well, don't you?
They're the minority, but they're certainly there. And the more people you talk to, the more you're going to run across the gamut of wild stories. And I would like to think I'm pretty good about just weeding out the ones that I don't think are credible. And I'm able to do that because I'm not here to I mean, I'm not on a mission to make everybody believe in Bigfoot. I don't even care if they do or not. I'm just here to document the stories, maybe a whole entire case or, a theme of cases across the South. I just documenting it. People can make up their minds from there.
Oh, I appreciate that about you too. So, in your opinion, since this whole pandemic thing started, have you gotten more or less reports on Bigfoot?
I have gotten less.
Okay.
Definitely less. Just in terms of people randomly sending them. I kind of always talking to people and they go, oh, well, here's my story, but I'm talking about just reports. I think people just hadn't been moving, haven't been going camping and out as much. They're getting back to doing that. But I think for a time period, people were just kind of Netflix and chill, and
yeah,
you got to have people moving about in order to chance upon these creatures. I mean, the state parks here in Texas were closed for a long time, and then there was limited capacity and all this stuff. So it definitely cut down on the people who were in the woods.
Yeah. I know that here during the beginning of it, in South Carolina here, we were getting a rash of reports, like right in the beginning, people, but it was mostly from people who live in rural areas, that had maybe some land or something like that. Because it was all over our news channels. Like every other day, there was a new Bigfoot story down here. And that kind of faded away, but just interested to, I guess I was interested to hear, your whole take on that, whether or not you'd seen more or not.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. You would think that if you look at the evidence of what other wildlife did, as people sort of retreated and stayed at home more, and there was less cars moving around, less pollution. Wildlife, cougars were being seen way outside. There was foxes and other things being seen in places where, in urban areas and where nobody generally sees them. So you would almost think, Bigfoot, now I can roam around. There's less people, and you would think maybe you'd get more sightings. But I mean, that's just my inbox. But you could ask another researcher, and maybe they got a bunch. It just depends, I think.
Yeah. Now, people can report to you, right? Like, say I see a Bigfoot in my backyard tonight, I can punch in Lyle's email address and report this to you, right?
Yeah. People, go to my site or whatever. It says, if you've seen something strange, or send me an email, or certainly get stuff on Facebook. I mean, a lot of people may be under the impression, and I get this, is like, I've had this sighting. I'm in Wisconsin. Can you come check it out? I'm in Texas, and no one pays me to. There's no payment for going out there. You're at your own expense, and there's so many reports coming in that I may get a sighting, and I may think it's credible, and I will. I want to talk to that person on the phone and get the information and stuff, but I don't often can just, unless it's just within a reasonable driving distance, I can't just go out there and right away look into it. But I have a big network of colleagues, though. If it is in a place where I do know somebody, I may pass it on and say, hey, if you want to go down there, you're in the same state. You may want to drive over there. So a lot of times we'll pass this stuff around.
Yeah, that's the way to do it, man. So here's a question I kind of like to ask everybody. What is one piece of advice that you would give a young and upcoming Bigfoot researcher or cryptozoologist?
The best advice I would give is to study first. Know the subject matter. And I mean read books, not surf around on the internet. get some history, because that's like your school. That's your basis of knowledge. And of course, if you're going to research a certain area, you want to research that topic and know, is there a history of sightings here? What are the sightings? Where have they been? And I'm not just talking about the one last week. You need to know the full scope so that you can immerse yourself in the subject. And I see that so often now, where people it's easy to make a Facebook group and make up a name, the Wild Frontier Bigfoot Research Group, and just immediately you're a Bigfoot research group. And that's great. And it's cool if people do that. But if you're going to post things and talk about that and interview people, you want to come across as knowledgeable on the subject. And that's where the study comes from and the learning. And then when you're out there, you're going to get people asking you about, have there been other sightings? Have people seen other weird stuff? And you'll be able to answer those questions, and people will say, oh, this guy knows what he's doing. Well, let me introduce you to my cousin who saw something. You're going to get more out of it if you seem knowledgeable, and well-balanced in your thinking. So that's my advice.
That's good advice, man. That's good advice. So, how's that hot sauce doing, man?
Well, it's doing so good that I don't actually have any more right now to fill orders.
Oh, wow.
I underestimated, I really don't know how many people are going to mail order something. I started this idea to do my own hot sauce, which I call monster sauce. I like cooking and I like hot sauces, and I got this. I got an idea for this and found a person or a company that could bottle it for me here in the Texas area. And so I thought, well, I'll sell these at my book signings and events, put them on the table and, stuff like that. And that's no problem. But then I thought, well, people are asking about it. I'll sell them by mail. Well, I got so many orders in literally like 15 minutes that
wow,
I didn't have enough for that. And I'm still waiting on more, this is about my third batch to fill the orders that are sitting there. So.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that, though, man. There's nothing wrong with that at all.
Right. So, I always say, like, not everybody reads books. Not everybody may wear a black T-shirt with a Bigfoot, but everybody eats. And when I put out something like a hot sauce, and of course, I've got a lot of fans and followers and friends that, they're interested in everything I do. But plus, I just realized people love hot sauce and designer things like that, food products. So yeah, I'm ramping back up to get more in stock, and then I'm about to do some events, so I'll actually have them on the table. And I've also been working on retail locations, so now you can pick up Monster Sauce at the Monster Mart in Fouke, Arkansas. You can get it at the North American Bigfoot Museum out in Boring, Oregon. You can get it at Expedition Bigfoot Museum in Georgia. So you'll be able to pick it up live in the wild.
That's awesome, man. So what's the next thing you got coming up? And do you have plans for any more books in the works?
I got a huge list of books that I would like to write. I haven't been really specifically working on anything right now. Working on some other, been bogged down by there's some band stuff and things that are required to make a living, really. And then the hot sauce kind of took up a lot of time. And then I'm about to start doing some events and going on the road. So I'm not really sure where the next book is going to go exactly. There's so many guys. It's almost like there's so many cool topics. I'm not sure. I'm losing focus. Early on, it was just like, okay, here's this one thing. I'll write about this. Now it's like, oh man, I can go here or there.
You got the cryptozoology ADD.
I really do. And it's, and people would suggest, oh, you should write a book on this and that. But, you have to be really careful because it takes me about a year to write a book. with the thorough research and all that. So it's a huge commitment, and you got to pick a topic that not only that I have passion for, but also that potentially is going to sell to compensate for all that time it takes to do it.
Right. Well, can you tell all my listeners where they can find your hot sauce, your books, your music, all that stuff? Where can they find that at?
Well, the best place to visit would be lyleblackburn.com, and that's got links to all the various things there. All of my books are available from Amazon, of course, paperback. Some are in hardback and in ebook, so easily available there. Then our Small Town Monsters films are, you can stream those if you have Amazon Prime. Just search for Lyle Blackburn. You'll see all the films. Many of those I'm either in or I've narrated about 7 movies. And then Ghoultown music. There's a link from lyleblackburn.com to that as well, but you can get Ghoultown on anywhere finer music is sold, iTunes, Amazon, Bandcamp, wherever. And then the hot sauce, just give it a week or so, and then just hit my website. You should be able to order some. The people that have gotten it so far, all rave reviews. It's like, I got some. I'm like, man, you're lucky.
I can't wait to try it. Well, hey, I'd like to have you on again in the future whenever you have time, if you get time. And I would appreciate it. So
yeah, for sure thing.
All right, man. Well, I again appreciate your time, and have a good night.
All right, you too. Talk to you later.
Well, that about does it for Dreamland tonight, dreamers. If you like the show, please remember to hit the subscribe button and feel free to leave us a review. Thanks again for listening, and good night.